Hi, it's Isabel, and today I want to recommend 3 books to you that I would say are part of the same subgenre of a subgenre of maybe another subgenre. You get the idea. These are some very specific recommendations. This video was inspired in part by Alice from the book Castle. She regularly does these videos where she just recommends 3 books that are tied together by some sort of theme, like 3 books about bees, or I think the latest one she did was 3 books that have swans on the cover, and I always like these kind of quick, short recommendations that she does. The video was also in part inspired by the brilliant Kayla from Books and Lala, and she does a series called Overly Specific Book Recommendations, where she takes something very specific and recommends a lot of books that kind of have that in them. So for an example, she made a video all about books about space that aren't set in space. And that's more or less what I'm going to do today as well. But this time I am going to recommend you supernatural historical fiction horror novels that have to do with a journey. Because apparently that is a very specific subgenre that I tend to enjoy. And so I just happen to have 3 books that kind of fit that I want to recommend to you. And I really hope that I'm not the only one who enjoys these types of books. If you have a similar reading taste to mine, you might want to give these a try. And the first book that I want to recommend is actually the one that is the least supernatural and maybe arguably also the least horrifying, but I would still say it counts in this very specific category. And the book that I want to recommend is The Hunger by Alma Katsu. And this one is based on the Donner Party, which was a group of people who tried to migrate to California in, let me look this up, 1846. So this was during the time when a lot of people went to California to settle there. However, the Donner Party wasn't very lucky, and a lot of different things went wrong during their trip. And they ended up being snowed in, and only a few from the party survived. And in the aftermath of it, there were some rumours that the survivors had to resort to cannibalism to survive and to not starve. And the book The Hunger kind of reimagines that trip and how it must have been for the people who were part of the Donner Party. However, it adds a kind of mysterious element to the whole thing, where you're not quite sure if something supernatural might be going on. Quite early into the trip, the party realizes that something might be haunting them because they find a boy who they thought had get lost, and he was actually killed. And that also gets the members of the party to turn against each other and be suspicious of each other because no one really knows what is going on. And what is going on is maybe supernatural, maybe it could be explained scientifically, but whatever it is, it creates a really suspenseful and uneasy atmosphere. The next book that I'm going to recommend also has that sort of atmosphere, even though it's probably more paranormal than supernatural. I'm never quite sure what the difference is. But anyway, it is a ghost story, and the book I'm talking about is Thin Air by Paver. This one is set in the Himalayas in 1935, and it follows a group of British explorers who want to climb the 3rd highest peak in the Himalayas. They know that other groups have tried doing that before them and have failed, but they want to try and get to the peak anyway. But as they ascend, the protagonist gets an uneasy feeling, and he thinks that he can sometimes see a figure that's observing them, but he's unsure if what he sees is real or a ghost, or only something he imagines. But no matter what it is certainly terrifying. And reading the book, you really get into the protagonist's head, and you don't know what is going on, you really want to find out, but somehow you're also just really scared of finding out what is really happening. As a quick side note, I could have also recommended Michelle Paver's other ghost story, Dark Matter. So if you enjoyed this premise, you might want to check out Dark Matter as well, because I think they are quite similar, especially in tone and atmosphere, and they both gave me that uneasy feeling while reading them. The last book I want to recommend is one that I think I've talked about before, and it is The Terror by Dan Simmons. The Terror is based on the, I'm bad with numbers, one moment, 1845 Franklin expedition. And this expedition went to the Arctic with the goal of finding the Northwest Passage. However, they got snowed in the process and had to spend the winter in the Arctic. And it isn't really known what happened to the members of this expedition, but The Terror takes sort of these facts and expands on them, imagining what might have happened. And this book is creature horror, so the members of the Franklin expedition are hunted by a great ice bear-like monster. But this monster that is killing crew members every now and then isn't the only danger that they are facing. They're also in danger of freezing, starving, succumbing to scurvy, and also other crew members as things get worse. Some crew members get kind of funny ideas about how best to survive. And this story is written from multiple points of view, so you really get to know different members of the crew, and there are a lot of them, but because you get to hear from some of them directly, it's kind of easier to keep them apart. But it's probably best not to get too attached to any of them, because in this setting, no one is safe. And that's it for my recommendation of 3 books that are all very chilling, atmospheric, and terrifying. Not just because of their supernatural elements, but also because of the way some of the characters behave and the group dynamics that arise in these isolated settings. If you know any other books that are kind of similar to these, let me know, because it's just a combination of elements that I really like to read about. And if you want me to do more very specific 3-book recommendations, let me know. I have some other ideas for combinations of elements that I think I could recommend books for. But that's it for today. Thank you for watching, and I'll hopefully see you in my next video. Bye!